One of my favourite things in the world is when I find a new game, film, book, album, any piece of media that acts as a kind of landmark. After your first encounter with a landmark piece of media, you're slightly different than before. It's something you keep coming back to, like it's been reserved a spot in your mind, and finding art that makes me feel that way is exhilarating. Like, everything has changed, and there are suddenly all these new possibilities before me, thoughts I never would have had flooding in. When I think of my own media landmarks, I think of things like, but not limited to, Evangelion, the Xenoblade Chronicles franchise, or Midsommar, all of which I've made videos about if you're interested. Today, we're here to talk about one of my latest landmarks, particularly on my journey through horror. I am of course referring to the indie games, milk inside a bag of milk inside a bag of milk, and milk outside a bag of milk outside a bag of milk. The bag of milk games are not long. You can experience all of the second in a few hours, and I'd be surprised if the first takes you longer than half an hour. Despite their brevity, however, these two games rank among some of my all-time favourites, and I think are a real testament to not only the infinite creativity of indie artists, but also to the fact that a game, or anything really, doesn't need to be big to be impactful. And I know that's ironic, coming from someone whose favourite game franchise is literally about giant worlds. But seriously, I think these games are an important reminder that good things don't always come in big packages, and hopefully by the end of this video, I'll have shown you why I think that. This isn't really going to be too much of a proper review or essay. I'm not really here to judge these games. Rather, think of this video almost as a form of documentation, a documentation of these games, as well as my emotional response to them. Hope you get something out of it. If you haven't played the duology before, I would highly recommend you do so. You can literally pause this video, get both on Steam or Switch for less than like 10 quid, go through both, and come back to this video in less than a day. Assuming you've already done so, or you just don't want to. Let's get into things. Content warning, the bag of milk games deal with some very heavy topics related to mental health, including but not limited to suicide and abuse. If you've at all struggled with this sort of thing, I would still encourage you to at least watch this video, if not play the games yourself, but if you're not up for it at the moment, no issue. Milk inside a bag of milk inside a bag of milk, or just milk inside as I'll be calling it from this point on, is, like I alluded to, short. You can see everything it has to offer in less than half an hour. A low resolution monochromatic. Milk Inside follows a young woman going to the shops to buy milk and then going back home. Not a complicated setup at all. Or at least it wouldn't be, were it not for her severe psychological issues, which include but are not limited to some pretty hefty PTSD, as well as some form of paranoid schizophrenia, all of which serve to make a simple milk run far more trouble than it needs to be. She almost has a panic attack when she notices she's been walking with one foot in the grass, sees every other person as some kind of twisted, barely human creature, and is triggered by the letter O. Just acknowledging it causing her to imagine terrifying images such as She doesn't have a name, by the way, not an official one. Other than The Girl, the fan base has taken to calling her Milk-chan, as well as Emolai, the latter being, from what I can tell, some kind of community in-joke. Because it's mostly humorous, I'll avoid Emolai, and Milk-chan is one of those things I feel is fine on paper, but should never be said aloud, especially when I'm trying to be serious. Plus, I don't want you to be confused with all the milks I'll be talking about. In the first draft of this script, I just called her The Girl, but that felt kind of impersonal, working against what I was trying to convey, and it just made me feel a little uncomfortable, to be honest. So in the end, I decided to give her a name of my own, Молочка, which is a portmanteau of
молоко
and
девочка.
To be honest, I still don't really think giving her a name is appropriate. I kind of like that she doesn't have a name, and I probably won't call her this outside of the video, but like I said, calling her the girl just doesn't feel right. Getting back on topic, Молочка is the focal character, but she isn't the player character. And who that is not as easy to answer as it might seem, depending on your definition of player character. The most frequent character Молочка interacts with is the voice, a kind of separate personality that speaks to her when she's on medication. This voice can be pretty dry, mocking and sardonic, but ultimately has her best interests at heart, being the one to encourage her to finish her journey to the store, reminding her she has to pay for the milk, and warning her when she almost gets run over by a truck she mistakes for a bear. You have the ability to choose what the voice says, but rather than being true dialogue options, it feels more appropriate to describe them as tone options. Whether or not you want to be firm but well-meaning, or just a straight-up arsehole. Select too many dickish options and... So the voice is the character we play, but don't confuse them for a self-insert for yourself, because you, the reader, are very much your own character. See, this is the first time Молочка has left her apartment in a long time, and is understandably not taking it the best. So, to help cope with the situation, she imagines herself as a self-aware visual novel character, her every movement and thought being monitored and recorded as such, hoping that the pressure will help her focus. When I first played the game, I assumed the reader and the voice were the same character, but on subsequent playthroughs, I realised that this is far from the case. I've already mentioned the voice's distinct, non-negotiable characterization, but there's also the name prompt you're given at the start of the game that doesn't affect any character. And of course, towards the end, on her way back from the store, Молочка tells the voice she wants to talk to the reader, blocks them out, and then lies down on a bench, directly speaking to you, telling you about things like her day-to-day struggles and her father's suicide. This is the only other part in the game where you're given the option to type out an answer, a completely separate mechanic from selecting dialogue for the voice, who, speaking of, interrupts Молочка just as she's in the middle of thanking you, reminding her that she needs to go home. The name thing does come back though. The bad end suggests that your name is the name of the medication she's been taking, which is what triggers the voice, which does kind of muddy the reader isn't the voice thing, but I don't think it necessarily contradicts anything I've just said. Maybe Молочка is the one in-universe naming the voice, using her medicine as inspiration. We do both help her after all. Or maybe she did initially intend for the voice and the player to be the same entity, but decided against it later on. Sounds a little convoluted, but honestly I wouldn't put it past this game. Speaking of she, Молочка I mean, she is indeed the aspect of the game I am drawn to the most. Her characterization, informed by creator Nikita Kyrukov's own experiences, is extremely well done, capturing the irrational terror of social anxiety in a way I reluctantly admit is all too relatable to me. I might not have seen my dad spread across the floor like jam or mistaken a cashier for a humanoid tadpole, but I have rehearsed what I'm going to say long in advance so I don't make an ass of myself. I have driven myself mad because I accidentally stepped too many times on one foot, or accidentally stepped on a crack with one foot so now I have to do it with the other, and I have imagined people watching me, my actions and my thoughts, particularly during troubling times. About a year and a half ago, I wrote a short story I had retroactively titled, "Today I Thought About Killing You." Bonus points if you can guess where I got the title in the comments.
It's about 1700 words and details the psyche of an unnamed protagonist who suffers from intense intrusive thoughts, often involving distressing scenes of cruelty.
Murder and violence are a part of my everyday life. From the moment I wake up to the instant I fall asleep, rarely does an hour go by without some sort of grievous bodily harm occurring in my vicinity. When I wake up and head out to work, I give a polite nod to the boy next door before bashing his head in with my suitcase, over and over and over and over until the concrete is stained a dark red, not unlike his school jumper. On days when I decide to drive in, most of the journey is spent not on the road but the pavement, a scene of pandemonic bloodshed as nearly everything in my path, living or otherwise, is run over without a second thought.
I wrote the story mostly as a way to explore my own experiences with intrusive thoughts, which, while not to the degree as experienced by the protagonist, were something I struggled with and, at times, still do. There's a passage towards the end where the protagonist... I detail my habit of imagining people are looking at me, in me. It's almost like I'm in a film. My internal monologue, a commentary track, my struggles, my secrets, everything I want people to know, out on display for them to see and understand, without me having to do the hard part, telling them what's wrong.
I like to imagine that there are people looking into my mind sometimes, watching as I navel gaze, understanding my issues and my thoughts on them. It's an appealing fantasy. Why should I have to tell someone about my problems when they can so obviously see for themselves and help me of their own volition? So yes, I am talking to you. You don't know it, and you don't know me, but I'm always talking to you. It was this aspect of Molotchka's character, aided by the genuinely strong writing, music and presentation, that I think is the reason something this short had such a strong impression on me. Why I felt so attached to her right off the gate. Milk Inside is a game that really captures the terror of living through mental illness, how it affects your life and reality in such inconvenient, painful ways. The brief instances where you manage to work something out and everything feels kind of okay for a moment. And then that moment ends, and you just need to deal with it all over again.
There isn't much else to say at this point.
Might as well mention it here since I couldn't find any other place to bring it up, but I have a theory that Molotchka's father didn't commit suicide, but was killed by his wife. Which is why Molotchka worries that if she doesn't come back with milk, her mother will throw her out the window.
But yeah, that's all there is. Anything else I have to say about the game, I can only do so after I talk about the second. Like I said, I think this game is a testament to how powerful short-form content can really be.
Before my first playthrough was even done, my mind was already in overdrive processing it, and I must have played it at least dozens of times since. In fact, I've almost come to find a sort of comfort in playing it.
In the same way Molotchka found encouragement in me reading her and judging her as she is, maybe I got something out of watching her externalize all these things about myself I've never really talked to anyone about. I know she isn't real, just as she knows I'm not real. Even so, it's nice we were able to help each other, if only for a little bit.
Interlude. Hey, I got Patreon.
3 tiers. £1 you get access to the feed and credits in all of my videos. £2.50 you get a big fancy credit, access to bonus tracks from my albums, as well as the original cuts of videos that get caught by copyright and need to be trimmed later. £4 you'll get an audible credit as well as a visual one at the end of videos, and early access to music I'm making. Speaking of music, if any of the music in this video has caught your ear, specifically my music, then you can listen to the soundtrack album Black Lactose by following the link in the description below or the pinned comment. Ideally, it'll also be on streaming at the same time this video goes up, but if not, I'll edit the pinned comment to let you know when. Also, shout out to my friend CyberGrape UK for drawing the cover, links to all their stuff in the description as well. I'm also making music outside of a video context. The last several months I've been working on my first major album, The Universe is a God-Shaped Hole. I've already released 5 songs spread across 2 singles, which you can find pretty much everywhere, and the album itself should be hopefully coming out early next year. Follow me to stay updated. Okay, enough shilling, back to the video.
Milk outside a bag of milk outside a bag of milk, or milk outside as I'll be calling it from this point on, is simultaneously both a natural, seamless continuation and a sudden shift and expansion. In literally every single way, Milk Outside is a much bigger game than its predecessor, which isn't saying much, but still. The original was a tight 15 to 20 minute, very linear experience, with simple yet effective monochromic graphics and a similar style of soundtrack of similar length, not counting the unused tracks.
In comparison, Outside is almost 10 times longer, taking well over 2 hours to experience everything the game has to offer. Still long enough to do a playthrough in one sitting, but long enough to the point where you might actually have to use the save system.
The style of the game has evolved to a much more interactive, traditional point-and-click visual novel format, with full character portraits with multiple expressions for Molotchka and more detailed, surreal backgrounds. There are multiple event graphics, including a fully animated opening and ending that perhaps fittingly really hammers home those Serial Experiments Lane vibes. There was even going to be voice acting, though this was scrapped and the actors' lines turned into those classic distorted syllables.
And compared to the arguably 1.5 in Inside, Milk Outside has 5 different endings. Well, technically the ending is the same, but we'll get to that when we get to that. There's a lot more to talk about this time around, so naturally this segment is going to be much longer than the first. I'll try my best to make sure it all flows nicely and isn't just one long ramble.
Milk Outside starts immediately after Milk Inside ends, Molotchka coming home to her mother with the milk she managed to buy. She runs through the house in a panic, desperate to get to bed as she was told, only to find herself in the kitchen, faced with the milk she just bought. She stares at it in apparent guilt for taking it away from its safe space before leaving and bumping into her mother, described as a familiar, formless creature, sniffing her body like a dog. Her mother injects her with her finger, filling her with a venom as she forces her to promise to never drink milk again. After this, Molotchka manages to get to her room, but not wanting to go to bed and bolstered by her successful milk run, dumps most of her medication and takes the one that allows her to hear the voice so she can brag to it. She almost immediately cracks and the voice makes her go back and take the medication she threw out. As she lies on the floor, Molotchka tries to get her thoughts in order. At the voice's suggestion, she visualizes them as insects, though as fireflies, not cockroaches as it originally suggests. But this doesn't help, and she ends up frustrated to the point of shouting, causing the fireflies to scatter. Since becoming a visual novel character worked out so well last time, she imagines herself now as a point-and-click adventure protagonist, with the voice being the one to actually do the pointing and clicking around her room, searching for her thoughts. And this is where, some might say, the game part of the game really takes place.
Like I said, outside is much bigger than inside, but that isn't saying much.
As the voice, you explore Malochka's bedroom looking for her thoughts turned fireflies, clicking between various items scattered about her room. Her sleeping mat, her old school bag, her sink, an old house plant, and many more. A firefly isn't behind all of them, but clicking on each does trigger a conversation with Malochka related to said item, giving you more insight into her personality, as well as her past and present issues. These conversations are really the heart of the game for me. Milk inside had already endeared me to Malochka, but outside, it felt like finally getting to be intimate with a friend who you've only known on a surface level up until now, and I really need to give props to Nikita Kyrukov as well as Maho Maiden, the co-writer of Milk Outside. They did a really fantastic job with the writing, and I'll certainly be checking out their other works once I have the time.
Speaking of Nikita, he also composed the game's soundtrack, the entirety of Insides as well as Outside, though helped by a number of as of yet unknown collaborators for the latter. I didn't talk about this during the segment about Inside since I couldn't find a place to organically bring it up, but I really like the soundtrack to these games. They're generally simple, repetitive, but pleasing synth melodies, with Insides being a lot crunchier to match the game's 16-bit aesthetic, and Outside being more fleshed out, diverse and experimental, dipping its toes into straight noise and rock on occasion.
Returning to the actual game, as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to find all the fireflies so Malochka can go to sleep soundly with all her thoughts. Interestingly, for this game, there doesn't seem to be any distinction made between the voice and the reader unless I'm missing something. Not sure if it implies anything, maybe she just didn't feel the need to have one, but regardless, once you, or the voice, recovers 4 fireflies, you're given the option to call it quits then and there and send Malochka to bed, or keep going and hunt for the remaining 2. Once Malochka does go to bed, a dream is triggered. This dream changes depending on multiple factors, including how many fireflies you found, whether or not you interacted with certain items in Malochka's bedroom, and whether or not you triggered the death scenes or not. More on them later. For now, I want to talk about the search of Malochka's room, as there's a lot of information you can get here, especially when it comes to learning about Malochka's background.
There are a total of 16 interactable areas and or items in Malochka's bedroom, amongst which are the 6 fireflies you need to get, one of which is found automatically, so really it's only 5.
These interactable spots are Malochka's sleeping bag, fan, phone, her school bag, sketchbook, umbrella, chest of drawers, laptop, waste bin, toothbrush, medicine notes, closet, plants, alarm clock, air vent,
lights,
a collage of photos, and the AC unit. There's also this glitchy pile of boxes that can be highlighted and clicked on, but nothing happens. It's never acknowledged at all, but I think it's supposed to be a pile of empty milk cartons. There are also 3 radios that let you play some mad tunes in between picking items, such as Radio 1_4, Radio 1_6, Radio 3_9, and my personal favourite, Radio 2_6.
Because A, describing them all would take a while, and B, I want you to play the game for yourself, I'm only going to be talking about 3 objects, and the conversations they spark. These are the most relevant to understanding Malochka's backstory and her present situation. This isn't to say that they're somehow the most important out of the convos, all of them are relevant when it comes to building Malochka's character and our connection to her, but for the sake of not bloating an already pretty long video, we'll be sticking to these 3.
Malochka looks at her notebook pages, stuck to the wall with numbers on them, the only kind of information she can easily absorb. The voice correctly guesses that these are her dosages, as well as their respective side effects. However, noting that Malochka already knows this by heart and that it isn't her handwriting also tells her to thank her mother. Молочка furiously tells it she doesn't need its help, but her screaming causes the pages to flutter, causing a fly to appear from beneath. Barely registering its entry into her, she continues. Clicking on the school bag, Молочка notes the worn-down pointlessness of the thing, finding its bloated weakness nonetheless cool. The voice asks her what's inside the bag, and she replies nothing special, just books, having taken out all the pens and papers. The voice presses her, saying she used to go to school. Молочка says she had a blast there, and the voice, humoring her, asks what she liked most. She notes the bright rooms, soft bed, nice food, and boasts of her perfect attendance. As the voice points out though, she didn't graduate, and asks about her last day. She says that one day her dad picked her up, since she had outgrown the school curriculum. They went home to her mum and had dinner. You're given the option to just leave it there, but you can also have the voice press her further, asking her to tell it again. Молочка begins again, adding that her dad told her she needs to grow up. Not fully understanding him, she got in the car nonetheless, and they went home to mum and had dinner. Again, you can leave it there, or the voice can press once again. The third time she tells the story, Молочka's dad drags her out the school as she kicks and bites, forcing her in the car and driving back in silence. They went home and they had dinner with her mother. Молочка asks you to stop, but at this point you're both in too deep. You not even getting a choice as the voice orders her, "Tell me again." After a moment's hesitation, Молочка says her father bought milk on the way home, again, despite her hatred of it. When they got back, her mother wasn't home, apparently not for the first time. The voice asks for more detail, but Молочка feels someone's eyes on her and turns, finding nothing there. She answers the voice, saying that everything that happened after something, which led to what happened after what had happened. In her frustration, she almost kicks the bag, but refrains, afraid of going blind if she moves even the slightest detail. The voice tells her to look at her feet, and she sees a tired firefly inching towards her. As she picks it up, it gains energy and returns to her. She notes that this thought was a sad one, but that's okay, as long as it's not alone. Молочка looks at her laptop, caked in dust from years of neglect. The voice asks why she fears it so, but she says it's a long and boring story. The voice insists, however, and Молочка begins. She doesn't remember how the laptop appeared, assuming one of her parents brought it in with nowhere else to go, encouraging her to use it. And use it she did, spending days on it, gaming, drawing, making 3D models, and using engineering calculators. Hobbies the voice seems amused by. But that was all before she actually went online. She uses the analogy of a hamster, which is somewhat confusing and ends up getting twisted and turned over, somewhat deliberately on her part, before the voice asks her to just tell it as it is. Молочка says that she had friends online, tens, hundreds of them, 317 in fact. Among them being at least one subset that shared her interests, though she tries once more to get distracted by explaining how you can't divide friends. No real people exist on the web, or at least that's how she saw it, believing every single one of her friends to be just photos with lines of numbers that die and live depending on whether her computer is on or not. That's all they were, easily predictable sequences. She then hesitates, and the voice tells her she can stop, but she continues. One day, someone appeared. Someone who kept her glued to her laptop, always on, always online. She starts to explain how he tricked her, but then the voice notices a firefly crawling out of the vent grill. It appears to be trying to say something, but Молочка has no interest in finding out what. The voice apologizes for interrupting her and asks if she wants to continue, but Молочка moves on, promising that if the voice does everything right, she might finish her story.
Like I said, play the game and see all the interactions for yourself. These are just the 3 I deemed the most relevant to today's discussion. So, on that note, what do they tell us?
We can tell she went to a school, possibly a boarding school, and according to Молочка herself, she actually had a decent, if perhaps lonely time there. However, her life was far from idyllic, struggling with mental issues even back then. Her family life was also very problematic, with there, at best, being a considerable amount of distance between its 3 members, with the mother implied to always be out of the house, and the father, well, we saw what happened to him. It's also suggested that Молочка is severely allergic to milk, which explains the all-consuming terror she goes into whenever it's mentioned, but it's also implied she continues to drink it nonetheless, hence the scary pile of boxes you can't interact with that I said is likely to be milk cartons. And there's of course the opening, where the mother makes her promise to not drink milk, the finger she's using to inject poison, likely just a needle with medicine in it to counter an allergic reaction. The mom is an interesting figure. Obviously Molotchka's view of reality is extremely distorted, meaning it's hard to take her as a 100% reliable narrator. Nonetheless, it's clear her mother inspires a great deal of fear and anxiety in her. Her father's suicide complicates things as well.
Like I mentioned during the segment about Milk Inside, playing that game, I had a theory that Molotchka's mother pushed her husband out the window. After playing Outside, I'm less sure of that theory, but regardless, the fact that someone pushed him out of that window, be it himself or his wife, doesn't invite the implication of a stable family. If you want to know more about this side of things, I'd recommend the video A-Grain did about the series, specifically exploring the games from the perspective of a domestic abuse survivor. It's in Korean, but with English captions, and I found it a very informative watch. Click the card in the top right to view it, or just click the link in the description.
Obviously, one of the biggest things to discuss is the story Molotchka tells the voice of her time online. It's clear she saw the internet as a kind of escape of sorts, coming to spend all her time on there, having hundreds of friends to share her variety of interests. What's interesting is the kind of solipsistic view she seems to have of these online friends, not seeing them as real people at all, and not really seeming to be bothered by this.
Perhaps it's a kind of safety mechanism, interpreting these people she cannot see but still has a connection to as algorithms of sorts, predictable machines designed to appeal to her and make her feel liked.
Certainly one way to boost your self-esteem, at least without the horror and risk of seeking a connection from a real human being. But it's really no replacement. Molotchka, like anyone else, desires companionship, and when someone offers it, even if it goes against her online people aren't real interpretation, she gladly accepts it. But to talk about that someone, we first need to explain the death scenes.
The death scenes are two skippable scenes that occur respectively towards the beginning of the game after her fireflies first get loose, and towards the end after choosing to finish the search for them, having found all of them or not.
You can easily trigger the first by having the voice press Molotchka about what it was she was thinking about before losing her fireflies. Eventually she gives in and, well, I think I'll just show you.
My personal interpretation of this scene is that it's a mix of suicidal ideation and remembering an allergic reaction to milk.
Regardless, it's the second death that's most relevant today. You can trigger this by telling Molotchka to finish her story at the laptop, afterwards going to the balcony once you've concluded the hunt for the fireflies. I've debated whether or not to actually show this part of the game, cause it's honestly kind of beautiful, especially the first time around, and I really don't want to rob someone of that experience. But for the sake of this video, I kinda have to, so all I can do is repeat myself and tell you to play this game if you haven't. It really isn't that long, and it is worth it. Trust me. At the balcony, Molochka comments on the circular building around her, saying she once saw the horizon before the building expanded and closed in on itself, extending in every direction except up, the only one she refuses to look. She talks about how the whole world doesn't make sense, trying to get her to believe that she's crazy, but in a small way that makes her happy. The idea that everything around her is, in a sense, for her. The voice then points out that the idea in and of itself is crazy, and she agrees with it. Remembering her promise, she tells the voice to keep in mind that everything she's going to say will hurt her, before throwing herself off the balcony. As she falls, Molochka speaks of one person, one out of the hundreds of accounts she met online that she was convinced had an actual, real human being behind it. She describes him as talking about someone's life like it's his own, expecting her to return the favor. So she did. Molochka told him everything about her, exposing to him her most vulnerable parts, trusting him to accept them. Instead, he took what she gave him and used it against her, spreading her information all over the net, sending an army of bots, or perhaps other users, to harass her. The internet, once a haven for Molochka, had now become just another way for the world to hurt her. The eyes that stalked her from every corner now haunting her screens as well. But Molochka resolves to finally put an end to things. Right as she crashes against the ground, her body exploding into pieces. Cold, she gets up, walks back inside, and pulls out the power cord, her and the voice simply noting that this is it.
For people of my generation and younger, the internet was already a massive part of our lives. It is arguably our principal third place. But especially during the pandemic, it feels like even more of our lives shifted online. And a lot of it never really shifted back when we started coming out of lockdown. In many ways, the internet is a boon, connecting us with people we never would have met, giving us new tools to share and express our interests. It's how I've been able to make and share this video after all.
But it is by no means any easier to interact with people online, despite what we might think. As Molochka's story suggests, with such increased potential for connectivity, there's also the possibility for a single person to attract the ire of so many more people. The real world can often seem thoughtlessly, passively cruel, society going about its destructive whims without consideration for you.
But other times, it's hard to ignore the sensation that it has a particular bone to pick with you especially, that you have somehow done something worthy of disgust and ridicule, like your specific existence offends existence itself.
The internet is something that can make that feeling manifest. Hatred and harassment is, more often than not, deliberate, targeted, malicious. Not that you were just caught up in the storm, but that it was sent your way in the first place. You aren't just being caught in the crossfire, you are what's being aimed at. After unplugging the laptop, Molochka says she's going to sleep, hoping that the next day comes after a year or even 10 years, imagining herself outside her body, detached from herself, yet still somehow remaining herself. A paradox, like milk outside a bag of milk outside a bag of milk.
I remember being a young child, awake in bed, my parents and siblings asleep. There were no sounds aside from the wind outside, the rustling of leaves, the occasional boat going by in the canal next to us. It was dark, but light still poured in from between the blinds, thanks to street lights, and every once in a while a car pulling into our end of the street. I would just lie there thinking to myself, going on wild daydreams, remembering shows or games I'd recently watched and played. Sometimes I'd just pull out an Asterix or Thomas the Tank Engine book and read it for a bit. Sometimes I'd just talk with my imaginary friends I made up in my head, often represented by my hands and socks. I can remember wondering what it would be like if the sun never came up. If nobody else in the world ever woke up again, if I just sat in my bed forever. Tomorrow, nothing but a dream I would never have. I was never really scared by the idea. If I were as verbose as I am now, I might have even called it beautiful.
Sometimes I'll still imagine an eternal night now, though for very different reasons. Most commonly, it's an overwhelming dread of tomorrow. I fight to keep my eyes open as long as I can. I push back sleep as far as I dare, knowing that when I close my eyes, the second I open them again, I am faced with a whole new day full of wholly new problems that demand my attention. At least when I'm in bed, nothing is expected of me other than just sleep. But if you're too scared to even sleep, then what's the point of going to bed in the first place? Like how my desire for an endless night started off innocent but twisted into a reflection of my own anxiety and fear, Molotchka's own relationship with sleep is something that was, too, corrupted. It was once her favorite time of the day. She'd hop in her bed, eager for the wondrous dreams she would have, waking up only to fall asleep again so she could drift back into them. But as those dreams left her, what sleep was changed. It became nothing. With no dreams, there was no longer any purpose for sleep, yet it is something she still has to do. Still, she must go through the motions, even as she finds no enjoyment or purpose in them. Still, she must sleep. Which finally brings us to the ending. After Molotchka goes to sleep, she will have one of 5 dreams, dependent on your actions.
All of them are extremely fascinating segments that honestly deserve their own dedicated analysis that I would be very happy to give. But I'm already worried enough about this video being a spiraling mess, so with that in mind, I'm only going to be talking about one. Maybe I'll make a second channel video about it, but for now, call it an extra incentive to play the game if you still haven't.
The shop ending is reached by triggering the first death cutscene.
This is also the ending that occurs when none of the requirements for the other 4 have been reached, making it essentially the game's default ending, and the one you're most likely to get on your first playthrough of the game.
The dream, which takes place in a familiar pixel art style, follows Molotchka as she finds herself escorting a young boy to the shops, Triska, the only character in either game to have a canonical name. That name being COD. Wonder who his favourite Mega Man character is. Triska is a bit of a handful. He's big-headed, inconsistent, weird, and has a stupid name. Her words, not mine. On the way to the shops, he sprints ahead, only to rush backwards and look at the ground, extending the trip by ages. By the time they actually get there, it's almost closing, and even once they're inside, Triska can barely function on his own. He doesn't know where the milk is, freezes up when he tries to ask someone for help, runs around screaming, gets stuck at the register paying for milk, and has to be bailed out by Molotchka. On the way back, Triska asks if Molotchka likes ice cream. She says no. He turns away before looking back and saying that it seems she isn't helping him at all. In case it wasn't obvious, this dream is a very direct parallel to that of Milk Inside, down to the similar style, plot, and remixed soundtrack. The main difference being Molotchka is now cast in the same role as the voice, with Triska taking her place. Triska, it seems, is a representation of what Molotchka sees herself as, or perhaps what she fears she is. An annoying, difficult to deal with child who is ungrateful for the help they receive, only burdening those who are forced to help them. I don't really think this is reflective of reality too much, even in Inside proper, but I suppose that is ultimately the annoying thing about people like us. Many a Molotchka worries that they are a Triska, worries they are a chore for those around them, dragging them along unwillingly as they stumble through society, only to later discard them for not doing enough to help them. Although, what does it mean to really help? Molotchka helps Triska get to the store and buy milk, just as the reader and the voice helped her to do so in the first game, and the voice helps her gather her thoughts in the second. But you might have noticed that these are solutions to immediate problems that are caused by other, much deeper problems. Milk Inside ends with Molotchka successfully buying milk, which feels like a massive victory, only for her to just go back to a scary mother who sent her out in the first place, which leads into Milk Inside and her trying to find her scattered thoughts so she can go to bed, wake up, and probably do the exact same thing the next day. There's no, I don't even know, breakthrough? Or I guess moment of healing or clarity, I guess.
The kind of issues Molotchka has, if a lifetime sometimes isn't enough to fix them, how could 15 minutes be enough? Or even 2 hours? Going to the shops to buy milk, getting ready for bed, these are small victories. Those are the game's win conditions because that's what's achievable at this moment. You can't just fix Molotchka's issues any more than you can your own. It doesn't mean you can't try and help yourself long term. Hopefully someday things will be better, you'll get better. You just won't be able to do it today. But what you can do today is get out of bed, change your clothes, have a shower, brush your teeth, drink some water, tidy your room a little, make dinner instead of ordering it, do your groceries, organize your thoughts before bed. They're small victories, small enough to maybe seem like they're more effort than they're worth. You might not even be able to do them on your own, I get it. But trust me, they are worth something. They won't fix you, but they will make the act of existing a little bit easier. And moment to moment, that's what's important. That's what the bag of milk games are to me. Just living, moment to moment, trying to make it to tomorrow in one piece, trying to make things work.
After her dream, Molotchka wakes up suddenly, tears in her eyes. She might still be scared from the nightmare she just woke from, or maybe she feels happy that yes, she can still dream. She looks up at the giant circle at the zenith of her apartment complex, an image of such crippling fear and anxiety for her. It's still there.